Parents, what spooky past life memory did your kid utter? Was watching an old video of a jazz drummer playing a solo. No idea who it was, but he was really good. My daughter, probably age 3, was looking over my shoulder for a minute before she said I used to play the drums like that when I was a man. Edit. When I got up this morning this had blown up. Thanks for the awards and hilarious comments. My daughter is the one who deserves an award, so I will pass it on. Unfortunately she no longer has any recollection of making that statement or playing drums. But she is a very musical person and I'm hoping she stays that way. Answer for my parents. When I was 4 my parents and I went to my aunt's farm. The wind started picking up and I looked back at my parents and said, "Gotta tie the hay bale down in the wind." That's how David died. To this day no one knows who David is. My little brother said when he was 3 or 4, when I was a grown-up, I went to war. And I never came back. My daughter asked me, "Remember my fancy hat?" And when I said no, she said, "Yeah. Before I was dead. I used to work in a bank. I saved my money and bought a hat in a round box. I was on the bus and a man almost sat on it. Then the bus crashed and I died." She was about 3 and totally casual about it. Editing for clarity. My daughter definitely knew about hatboxes. She was very into musicals. One of which was Easter Parade. A movie where fancy hats were a very big deal. She went through a phase of being really interested in death after my mom died. So I think that's where the bus crash came from. At the time, we were talking a lot about death and dying and the idea that accidents can kill a person and how scary that is. I personally think kids say weird stuff because they aren't yet fully wired. Mentally I reportedly used to talk to a teddy bear that lived in a cabinet at about the same age. And would sit there happily chatting at an open door for ages. My middle son used to talk about having a different mom before me. He would say she was blonde and looked nice but wasn't nice. He would bring it up randomly and only ever got a bit emotional when he would tell me that when he was with her he never got to grow up. He said he chose me to be his mom this time because I would let him grow up and get old. When he would say the last part it was as if he was looking for reassurance. He'd ask me like, "Right, Mom, I can grow up this time?" Really fucked me up sometimes. My nephew, around 2 or 3, would talk about his other mom and then look confused when you asked him to elaborate. She's not here now. My 5-year-old daughter said to me, "I was in your belly twice. Mama. The first time I died before I came out. But I came back. I did lose my first pregnancy 8 months before getting pregnant again." She was never told. I don't know what it was, but that's what happened. Edit. Thanks everyone. In typical Reddit fashion. I didn't expect this one to blow up quite so much. Lol. But my daughter is pretty awesome and has a crazy amazing memory. She recalls events from when she was 2. So, she very likely heard my husband and I discussing it. Any other explanation sort of, well, creeps me out. Ha. And pregnancy after miscarriage is a weird bundle of emotions. I understand how this can help people when they are feeling a loss, but that was not my intention with the post or anything. If it helps, I'm very happy to have shared this weird little memory. Be well everyone. My son said once, "Mommy, when I was big and you were little. I remember when we danced in the kitchen. The only person I ever danced in a kitchen with as a child was my grandfather." I used to watch my nephew when he was about 3 or 4. One day he was at my house and pointed to a magnet of Arizona. It had a picture of the desert with rock formations. Kid pointed at it and asked where it was. He said he used to live by red rocks like that with his first family who all had straight, dark hair, his is blonde and curly. Now, and that he had a mom and a dad and he had a brother until he went too far into the desert too close to dark and got eaten by not dogs. Not wolves but smaller. I said coyotes? And he kind of mouthed the word and said, "Oh, that's what you call them." Then he was sad and didn't want to talk about it anymore, so we had lunch and that was the first and last time he mentioned it. When my son was 4 we had driven past a cemetery. He asked me if I remembered when he died and was buried. I said no and asked him what he meant by saying that. He said he had died, was buried in a cemetery, and that's when he started growing in my belly. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when he said this. He doesn't remember say this. When my nephew was about 3 or 4, my sister said he was throwing a tantrum in the car while he was in his car seat and he yelled at her randomly, "I waited 100 years to be born." When I was 3, I used to tell my mom stories about my other family every night before bed. The siblings I had and the dog too. One day she took me to Target and I told her I wanted big girl undies and she said she would buy them for me and I could wear them when I was potty trained. I told her that my other family already potty trained me so I can start wearing them now. I put them on that day and never had an accident after that. She never potty trained me and was just shocked. Didn't believe in ghosts and shit until this day, but it's fair to say that now I have a slightly more open mind. Our 2/3-year-old daughter was playing on her own, but like she was playing hide and seek with an imaginary friend. Asked, "Are you playing hide and seek?" She said, "Yes." "Who are you playing with?" "Uncle Andrew." My wife's brother Andrew was 7 when he drowned when my wife was 5. Didn't like to talk about it, so we never mentioned it. I don't have kids, but when my brother was a toddler he said something to my mom about throwing hay in the window for the horses. My grandfather died before his birth and was a farmer. The barn had windows and he would just throw the hay in the windows for the horses to eat. My mom was really freaked out, but he never said anything else similar again. I had a brother pass away from brain cancer. At the time we had a cat who was a calico and just sort of knew he was battling something. She was really mean to most people, but with him she was gentle. He would grab her paws and she would just let it happen. Well, about 3 years after he passed, my parents had another child. Another boy. He was about 3 when he told my parents about the white, brown and black cat that used to let him grab her paws. She had died about a year before he was born. Apparently when I was really little, around 3 or so, I told my mom that this was my last time here, that I wasn't going to come back. My little brother was born just after 9/11. When he was a toddler one time, he went on about how he used to work in a tall building and wore a suit and tie. Freaked my parent out. According to my dad, when I was around 5 I was staring out of the window during a heavy thunderstorm. When he asked me what I was doing I answered, "When do the bombs drop? Are they gone yet?" I grew up in Germany. And my dad's dad used to alert the city for incoming air raids. My grandpa died 3 days before I was born. And at 5 I had no idea about the war. Or my grandpa. Really freaked him out at the time. A couple moments later I forgot what I said when he asked me more questions. When he was around 4, my grandson used to talk about his job at the ice factory. One day he was talking about his boss Farvo and the day he quit. I asked him why he quit and he turned to me and quite passionately said, "I'll tell you why I quit. They made me work 15 days in a row without a break and I had enough of that." It was weird hearing all that righteous anger coming out of that little boy. My daughter just informed me that he was 3 when he always talked about working at the ice factory. So yeah, scary 3-year-olds. My coworker has a son who, when he was about 3, told her he used to grow rice and lived in a place where 2 rivers met. He was able to name the rivers. And she located it on a map of East Asia. Pretty wild. My middle son, 5, is named after my wife's grandfather. He just looked at her a couple of weeks ago and said, "I remember when you were little and you sat on my lap." He also once gazed into my mother-in-law's eyes, at 3 to 4 years old. Stroked her cheek and said, "My daughter." None of mine have. But back pre-pandemic I was watching my friend's then 3-year-old for her and he saw a big military ship and he got this kind of faraway look and said, "I remember when my boat sank. There were so many sharks." I said, "What?" He blinked, said, "What?" and then started asking questions about the boat. I mentioned it to my friend and she said, "Yeah. He does that sometimes." My younger sister, when she was 3, started talking to my mom about when I was a big girl. "And you were a little girl." She said she went to my parents' wedding. She described her old self physically. And my mom says that sounded like my mom's grandmother Grace. My sister also talked about the greenhouse she used to live in at the end of a dirt road and the fact that her mother, my mom's great-grandmother Matilda, died from a snake bite. While they lived there, she described the snake as pretty and with the full description my mom thinks she was describing a copperhead. Now we lived in northern Nebraska, no copperheads. And Matilda died in southeast Oklahoma, Copperhead region. My sister said she killed the snake with a hoe. These discussions always took place at bedtime. One day, We were putting in the garden and my dad was sitting down and sharpening the hoe with a file and my sister told him he was doing it wrong. He told her to show him how to do it. She put her hands on his and placed them in the correct position. And later he said that she was right. He was doing it wrong. For those of you interested in timelines, this would be in 1980. My mother's grandmother Grace died in 1968. And her great-grandmother Matilda died in 1902. Also, we don't know if snakebite was the cause of death for her great-grandmother Matilda. I was 15 at the time these little nightly discussions were going on, so I remember them fairly well. She probably told these things on and off for about 6 months, and by 4 she would say, "I'm tired of talking about it." I am not a great writer, so I hope this is not too confusing. My little brother, when he was little, like 3 or 4, said that he was in the jungle saving animals, and one day he had to decide if he would stay with the animals or come live with us. He chose us, but reminded my mom that he couldn't stay forever. Just for a little while. He passed this last January at 26 years old. Edit. I appreciate the love. Everyone make sure to say what you need to those who need to hear it. I don't believe it's my place to tell the whole story. And I don't believe this is the forum. So I'll leave this as is. I also want to advocate for professional mental health for those who have experienced the loss of a child, sibling, parent, etc. Don't figure it all out alone. Go get help. I'm the kid in this case. I don't believe in the paranormal. I'm a pretty reasonable guy. I have degrees in science and healthcare and I'm pretty grounded. But since I was a child, I had a memory of me stumbling out the back door of a club. I couldn't hold myself, either really drunk or on drugs, and I slipped down a staircase. Hit my head in the alley and died. I was about 19. I was thin. Had long blonde hair. I was wearing a brown-red leather jacket. I remember the neon signs. The staircase. The door I walked out of. Even the interior. I can paint the picture perfectly if I had any talent in art. Anyways, so 2 years ago, I took a leisure trip to Budapest. And while exploring the ruined pubs with my wife, I found the fucking alley. It was funny because I remarked to my wife earlier, when we arrived, that I felt something about Budapest that felt like home and familiar, and I felt oddly too comfortable there. Like I could have never left. I think about this quite often. Edit. Because I suck at Reddit, this is late. The alley is found in what is now Instant Club. I grabbed a clear photo of the area and my trajectory. The question I have is, what was this club before I was born, 1988? My daughter is deathly afraid of fire because the fire at school killed my sister, and my other mom was really sad. When she started preschool at 3, they had a fire drill and she cried hysterically until it was over and she was convinced there was no fire. I had to go pick her up, and on the way home she told me she's glad they have fire drills so all of the kids don't die like at her last school. I'm still freaked out. Not exactly what you asked. But my granddaughter, when she was about 3, told me she dreamed about her sister, she only has brothers, who was just this big, holding her thumb and finger about a half-inch apart. She doesn't know her mother had a miscarriage before she was born. I was driving my family across the state to visit family. Some commercial on the radio about Vegas came on and I started singing, "Viva Las Vegas," in my best Elvis impersonation. My son was about 3 to 4 and he says, "I don't like Vegas. I lost my life and a lot of money there." His mom and I glanced at each other like, WTF? He never said anything else about it. My son was little, about 4 years, and he was playing with his toys and talking. I asked him, "Who are you playing with?" He replied with my sister's name. My sister died when I was young. My father said that my bro when he was 3 said something like, "When I were bigger I had a pretty girlfriend and we died in a car." Edit. Wow. This exploded. Sorry for the grammar mistake there. Actually, my brother said something like "Cuando yo era grande," when the correct way of saying it in Spanish is "Cuando yo era grande." I tried to make the toddler talking and I guess it was OKXD. This was told to me by my parents. When I was 6 or so, my dad was watching a war documentary and it talked about a tube. I then said, "You mean the tube from when I was a grown-up?" My dad asked me to explain more and I said me and another person was put in a tube with a knife and was tasked to kill the other person, but I got stabbed in the chest. He says it still keeps him up at night. Edit. Holy fuck, I didn't expect this to blow up as much as it did. Thanks, kind strangers. My son was 3 at the time. At bedtime he said, "Mama, One time the bad guys got me and drove me in their car. And I said what? And he continued to tell me a story about being locked in a room and he was hungry and I didn't find him. The bad guys got away and he never got out. That shish. T scared me so much I still get freaked by it. I held him so right that night. Not me but a friend's little sister. The whole family was out for dinner at a restaurant in a skiing village which they recently bought a cottage near. My friend's little sister as soon as they walked in said, "I know this place. My mother and I used to paint here." To which her mother replied, "We've never been here before." "What do you mean?" She replied with, "No. My mother from before. We used to paint here all the time." The family was obviously a little freaked out but didn't think much of it as she was pretty young and they figured just messing around. Later on though, when talking to the waitress, the little girl again adamantly mentioned how she used to paint there and the waitress revealed that it in fact was an art studio for many years in the 1900s but had been converted sometime in the early 2000s into a restaurant. Needless to say the entire table, waitress included, got goosebumps and were at a loss for words. From a message my ex sent me last year about our daughter who was 3 at the time. On hearing a motorbike. I had one before I was little. It went whoosh and then I had no legs and mummy and daddy had to help me but I didn't want to so I went to sleep and now I'm too little. My daughter would refer to me as her new mommy. Then, as her vocabulary increased, she said, "You're my new mommy. But it's okay. I like you." Then one day, "You're my new mommy. I had 2 brothers. But they all died. But it's okay BC I like you." She never mentioned her real family again. Last time she did she was about 3 or 4 years old. When our son was maybe 3 or 4 he described his life as a ballerina on stage, from the lights to the music to the applause. His next words chilled me to the bone. "I was at a party on a boat. And I fell into the water. Then poof I was here." I asked him to relate the story when his father came back from a business trip a couple weeks later. And it was identical. But after that we never discussed it again. I didn't want to go there. My daughter talks about her grandson all the time. I thought it was just an imaginary friend. But then a couple nights ago she came out of her room at bedtime absolutely sobbing and said, "I'm sad because I miss my grandson. He lives in my old house in my old neighborhood. She has never lived anywhere other than this apartment." Edit. Totally thought this would get buried. To answer some questions we have asked her about him. But it's pretty hit or miss on whether she'll actually answer or just think it's a fun game. The other night after some questions she told us that he sleeps in a crib and has a white tongue. But when I asked her his name a few hours ago she said, "Guga," and laughed and laughed. It totally could be just her imagination. But she also told me some weird things about the baby I lost a few months ago. Which really makes me wonder if she remembers, knows things we don't. My grandma has a story from when my dad was 2 to 3 years old. He told her once that he was almost born before but was too sick and died and had to come back later. Turns out my grandma had at least 1 miscarriage before he was born that was likely due to birth defects caused by a medication she had been taking at the time. My mom told me when I was 3 or 4 that I cried when we passed an old blue Volkswagen Bug. I told her that was the car I died in. It was apparently very hot and I had a baby in my belly. When my son was about 3, he told us how he remembered being a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. This was in 1998. My parents don't use Reddit so I'll answer this for them. I think I was 3 playing with a corkscrew when I blurted out that I used to have one of these when I had black hair. I'm blonde. My parents said they asked me what it was and I responded that it's used for opening wine. Freaked the hell out of them. Anyone interested in this sort of thing should look up the WW2 U.S. General George S. Patton. He allegedly attributes many of his victories throughout Europe to a familiarity with the battlefields, having fought on them countless times in past lives. I'm pretty sure there's a book about it. Edit. I found the book on Amazon. Not exactly the same thing. But my 5-year-old daughter has been saying things like, "When I look in mirrors there are a lot of people in here." And, "Why were so many people in my room last night?" For like 2 years. Update. It had been a while since she said anything like the above. But yesterday at dinner she turned around and looked behind her. Then said, "Sometimes I hear voices behind me. But when I look back, no one is there." Very recently I was actually talking to my parents about past life memories after I read this really interesting article. They ended up telling me about a past life memory I had aged 5. They actually seemed a tad worried talking about it. But as they don't have Reddit, I will relay it, and just to be clear, I have no memory of this myself. So aged 5, my parents brought me one of them toy police cars. I spent a little while playing in it, but apparently didn't seem happy. My parents asked why I didn't seem to be liking it, and I apparently told them I didn't like it because I remember being stabbed inside a car like this before I came here. I said my skin was black then though. They said they were a bit taken aback by this and just didn't speak anymore about it. But then a while later my granddad came round and wanted me to show him my new toy. At this point my parents tell me I refused to get in it, saying something like what I said to them. Apart from this time I said something more along the lines of I wasn't going to get in it because when I drove it before I came here I was stabbed and it hurt. I take it from how they speak about it that to them this seemed pretty weird. I understand that because it makes me feel weird as well. Out of curiosity I thought I'd Google and try find if any police officers died from stab wounds around the time I was born. Now I was born in the inn. I am sure that many police officers die in the line of duty each year, but one did stand out. The date when I was born had one registered police death. The officer was black and died after being stabbed to death in his own patrol car. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.